An evening in the newsroom was always like 100 others. Monitors glowed in the semi-darkness. Footsteps echoed dully in the corridors, and in the control room, behind the glass door, the steady hum of the servers could be heard. Alexei Rudnev, a sound engineer with 10 years of experience, had long since gotten used to these sounds. The rustling of wires, the clicking of buttons, the barely perceptible background noise of a large building that never sleeps even at night. This time, he got a job that no one wanted to take: to restore a damaged audio recording from the mayor's press conference held the day before. The file was broken, with gaps and strange artifacts, as if someone had deliberately tried to spoil it. Alexei did not like such tasks, but he did not refuse. The editorial office had long known that if something could be saved from digital oblivion, he would do it. He settled down at the console, put on his headphones, and brought up the spectrogram on the screen. The headphones began to rustle as usual. Interference, fragments of phrases, muffled claps. Alexei patiently cleaned out the noise, restored the dynamics, and equalized the levels. With each passing minute, the recording became clearer. The mayor's speech became more and more intelligible. At some point, when he was about to save the result, a strange voice flashed in the left channel. Not the mayor's voice, not someone's cough, not a technical failure, a whisper. She knows. She won't be here in the morning. Alexei took off his headphones, as if the words would make them disappear. His heart started beating faster. He rewound and listened again. The same whisper on the edge of audibility, but clear as a scratch on glass. He checked the source. The official copy didn't have this fragment, only his restored version. His fingers trembled as he ran the spectrogram again, looking for an anomaly. The whisper wasn't random, not the result of interference. It was recorded intentionally over the main sound disguised as noise. Alexei wondered who could have inserted this message, and most importantly, who was it addressed to? He returned to the file and started looking for who was at the press conference. A familiar name flashed in the list of accredited people: Marina Klimova, a young journalist from the city newspaper. The video showed. Marina asks an awkward question. The mayor avoids answering. A fuss begins in the hall. In the official version, this moment is cut out. Alexei felt a chill run down his spine. The editorial office had become even quieter than usual. He looked around. There was no one behind the glass door, only the reflection of his own face, pale with tired eyes. He turned the recording back on, this time at full volume. The whispers were menacing, almost intimate. She knows. She won't be here in the morning. Anxiety was growing inside. Alexei understood. If it weren't for his intervention, no one would have heard these words. He started digging through other files, looking for similar anomalies, but everything was clean. Only this fragment, like a splinter in the silence. He wrote down the time, the date, the name of the journalist. The thought was spinning in his head. What if this is not just a threat? What if this is a warning? It was starting to drizzle outside. The drops were hitting the glass, drowning out even the work of the servers. Alexei turned off the equipment, but that same whisper was still ringing in his ears. He didn't know what to do next, but he understood. Now he couldn't just forget about it. Sometimes you can hear more in silence than in noise, and sometimes silence is the beginning of real anxiety. In the editorial office, the morning began with silence, in which sounds seemed alien. The rustling of papers, muffled steps on linoleum, rare phone calls. Alexei Rudnev arrived earlier than everyone else, although he had not slept almost all night. The whisper, fished out of the dark depths of the audio file, did not let go. It seemed that it continued to sound even without headphones, somewhere on the border of hearing. He turned, the recording back on, rewound to the right part. The voice seemed even clearer this time, and therefore even more unreal. She knows. She won't be here in the morning. Words that weren't supposed to be on the air. Words that someone had placed in the very center of the silence. Alexei tried to convince himself that all this was a coincidence, someone's evil prank, a technical glitch. But experience told him, there are no coincidences when it comes to power and fear, especially in this city where other people's fates are hidden behind the facade of news feeds. He opened the list of those accredited for the press conference. Marina Klimova's name caught his eye, the only one of the young journalists who dared to ask an uncomfortable question. Alexei remembered how she raised her hand in the video, how the mayor responded to her with irritation, how an awkward pause hung in the hall. Then the recording abruptly ended, and this moment disappeared from the official version. He tried calling Marina. The phone was silent, the beeps cut off into the void. There were no new posts on her social media page, no signs of returning to work. Alexei asked his colleagues, but they only shrugged. She's probably sick, or she's gone on vacation. No one was surprised. No one started looking. In the corridor at the coffee machine, he met the editor of the city newspaper where Marina worked. He waved him off. Young people today are unreliable. They disappear for a couple of days and then show up as if nothing happened. But there was uncertainty in the editor's voice. Alexei caught it and realized something was wrong here. He returned to the video of the press conference, rewound to the moment where Marina asks a question. The faces in the room are tense. Some look down, some look nervously to the side. The mayor answers evasively, then abruptly waves his hand, and the camera moves to the side as if the operator had been given a sign. In the official version, this episode is completely missing, cut out with surgical precision as if it had never happened. Alexei started looking for other traces. In the editorial archive, he found a list of everyone who worked at the press conference: cameramen, sound engineers, security. Some names were crossed out. Marina's last name was circled in red. Inside the folder was an empty envelope with the bold writing, "Do not release without approval." He felt a chill run down his spine. In the evening, Alexei decided to walk to Marina's house. The area is residential. The windows in her apartment are dark. No one answers the phone. The neighbors, an elderly woman and a student from the upper floor, shrug their shoulders. Girl. Yes, I think there was, but I haven't seen her for a long time. Maybe she moved away somewhere. The entrance smelled of dampness and something bitter. Alexei paused by the door and listened. Behind it was silence, too thick to be normal. He returned to the street and looked back. Someone's shadow flashed in the window opposite for a moment, but then disappeared. At home, he opened the audio file again. In the spectrogram, the whispers looked like a strange blip, unlike the usual noises. He zoomed in and noticed that the track was slightly shifted at this point, as if someone had edited the recording manually. All night, Alexei searched the internet for any mention of Marina. No news, no rumors, not even gossip. As if the girl had disappeared not yesterday, but many years ago. He tried to send a letter to her email. The letter was not delivered. The address does not exist. An alarming picture formed in Alexei's head. Someone was carefully erasing all traces, not only in the notes, but in life as well. He remembered the whispered words, "She knows. She won't be here in the morning." At that moment, the silence in the apartment became almost unbearable. He realized that if not him, no one would look for Marina. In this city, silence is not just the absence of sound, it is a way to pretend that nothing happened. And if the voice disappears, it means that someone really wanted it. Alexei looked out the window at the rare lights of the night city, and for the first time in a long time felt fear, which did not leave even at dawn. Silence is also an answer, sometimes the most terrible. Strange things began to be noticed more and more often in the editorial office. Everything seemed to be the same faces, the same conversations by the coffee machine, the same news on the monitors. But there was something elusive in the air, as if someone had quietly turned down the volume of the world. Colleagues talked about the weather, about new orders from above, but there was a barely noticeable falseness in their voices. Questions about Marina were met with indifference or brief irritation, as if talking about her was something inconvenient, almost indecent. In the evening, when the corridors were empty and the editorial office was plunged into the familiar semi-darkness, a quiet click was heard from the computer. The archiving system had completed its search. On the screen, among dozens of files, names appeared, familiar and not so familiar. The list of the missing included those who had once worked with sensitive topics. A couple of journalists, a cameraman, a former editor. All of them had disappeared suddenly, without a trace, and no one remembered them out loud. One of the files is an old audio recording of an interview dated 2 years earlier. Against the background of familiar voices, that same whisper suddenly emerges, barely audible but recognizable. He knows he will not be here in the morning. It becomes clear an accident is excluded. Someone is leaving these fragments intentionally, as if scattering crumbs for those stubborn or stupid enough to follow the trail. In an attempt to figure out what connects the disappeared, you have to leaf through old issues, look for forgotten notes, and reconstruct chains of events. In each case, there is a topic that someone at the top didn't like. In each case, there is sudden silence, as if the person had never existed. Contacting relatives turned out to be no easy task. They answered calls reluctantly, spoke briefly, avoiding details. Someone hung up, someone advised not to interfere if you value your life. In conversations with colleagues, the same blank wall. A couple of phrases, a glance to the side, and again silence. At some point it becomes clear. The disappearances are not an accident or a series of tragic coincidences. It is a system. A question arises in your head. If everyone is silent, it means that someone really does not want the truth to come out. The night passes in attempts to piece together the disparate fragments. On the table are sheets of paper covered with writing, printouts, flash drives. On the screen are spectrograms, where the silence suddenly flares up with a splash, and in the depths, a strange voice is heard. Inside, the feeling grows as if someone is watching every movement. The phone gives out unknown numbers a couple of times, but on the other end there is only silence. A new track appears in the audio editor, a collage of found whispers. It is hard to listen to. Each phrase is like a prick. Each pause is like a fall into the abyss. At some point it seems that the silence becomes thicker, that it is alive, that it chooses who to leave and who to cross out. Sleep goes far away. One thought is spinning in my head. If not only people disappear, but also the memory of them, then someone knows very well how fear works. On such nights you feel especially keenly. In this city, even silence can be deadly dangerous. And if the voice disappears, it means that someone has decided that their time is up. All that remains is to go further, following the tracks in the emptiness, to where the light ends and someone else's game begins. Time was no longer divided into days and nights. Everything merged into a viscous, anxious expectation, as if the city itself had become one continuous corridor where something that did not want to be found hid behind every corner. I hardly slept. I did not eat. I only listened. I listened to the silence, in which I could now guess not only whispers, but also strangers' footsteps behind the door, the creaking of the elevator on the landing, short, interrupted calls from unknown numbers. It seemed that even the walls of the editorial office began to eavesdrop, and the windows reflected not only my own face, but also someone's shadow behind my back. One such evening, when the city outside the windows was drowning in a damp haze, and cups of half-drunk coffee were piling up on the table, a new fragment was discovered in the archive of sound files. At first glance, it was an ordinary recording of a meeting, where everyone was talking in a low voice, interrupting each other. But as soon as the noise was cleared out, that same cold alien voice emerged in the pause between the lines. "Don't ask, she won't come back." My heart sank. Each new whisper was not just a threat, it was a signature under an invisible sentence. Someone was not just watching what was happening, someone was controlling it, leaving marks in the silence for those who knew how to listen. In the spectrogram, this fragment looked different, as if an additional layer, invisible to the normal ear, was sewn into the track. For the first time, there was a feeling that behind all this there was not one person, but an entire system, precise, cold, faceless. The official versions of events began to crack at the seams. Names disappeared from the protocols, entire paragraphs from the reports and edited cuts appeared on the air, where instead of the truth there remained only a thick, viscous silence. Almost by accident, I managed to track down Marina's last recording. The file was hidden in a backup folder, without a date or signature. The recording contains her voice, tired, quiet, as if she were speaking to someone in the semi-darkness. "If you hear this, then I am no longer here. Don't trust the silence. It is not emptiness. It is proof." A shiver ran through my body. Marina's words sounded not like a farewell, but like a warning. That same evening, the equipment started acting up. Files disappeared from the disk, errors appeared on the screen, and a short message arrived on the phone. "Stop before it's too late." The light suddenly went out in the editorial office for a few seconds, but that was enough to feel how invisible. Threads stretched in the darkness, connecting everyone who had ever heard something unnecessary. An inner voice advised to drop everything, erase the traces, pretend that nothing had happened. But it was too late. Everything that was found, everything that was heard, became part of a chain that cannot be broken without consequences. That night, when the city finally plunged into damp darkness, he collected all the audio fragments, all the documents, all the names. He opened a blank document and began to write, not an article, not a denunciation, but a chronicle of disappearing voices, so that at least someone someday would hear in this silence not only fear, but also the truth. Before dawn, when the rain began to rustle outside the windows again, a new letter arrived at the editorial office. No subject, no text, only an attachment, another audio file. In it, the same viscous silence, the same whisper. You're next. At that moment it became clear. Silence is not just evidence. It is the last thing heard by someone who has listened to other people's secrets for too long. Everything that was found was sorted into folders. Audio fragments, printouts, names, dates, disappearing faces and photographs. But the more evidence was collected, the stronger the feeling became that all this evidence was like sand through your fingers. Each new day brought no relief, but only new questions. The editorial office now looked at him warily, as if they sensed an outsider in him. Colleagues began to avoid him. Conversations in his presence broke off mid-sentence. Even familiar sounds, the clicking of keys, the clink of a mug on the table, now seemed alien, not of this world. At some point it became clear. The city can erase not only people, but also the memory of them. He tried to publish a chronicle of the disappeared voices, but the material was returned with the note, not in format. There was silence on social networks, accounts disappeared, messages did not arrive. Even archives, where files were stored yesterday, were empty today. All that was left was his own computer, where traces of other people's lives still glowed. In the evenings, when the rain was howling outside the window and not a single light was burning in the apartment, he listened to the collected whispers. In each one, fear in each one, a request not to forget. But the more he listened, the clearer it became. The silence between phrases is not emptiness. It is someone's hand, erasing voices, crossing out destinies. One night, when the city had finally plunged into viscous darkness, a new message came on the phone. You heard everything. That's enough. At that moment, it became clear the fight was over, not because the truth had been found, but because no one wanted to hear it. He went outside. The rain was pouring down. The streetlights were shaking in puddles. There were no passers-by. Each window reflected its own fatigue. The city seemed to exhale. It got rid of another one who had been listening for too long. In the morning, his place in the editorial office was empty. The computer was turned off. The folders were erased. The cup with half-drunk coffee was gone from the table. His colleagues were silent, as if he had never existed. In the list of employees, a new name, a strange face. Only in the archive, in one of the forgotten folders, a short path remained. Silence in which, if you listened closely, you could catch a barely noticeable whisper. I heard everything. Don't forget. In this city, even memory is a luxury, and the voice that dared to speak always remains alone. And silence is not the end. It is the last thing that will remain after all of us.